Welcome back to QHSE Talks, the platform where we take safety standards, regulations, and professional certifications and turn them into practical, real-world understanding. Whether you are actively preparing for the CSP, maintaining your professional competency, or leading safety performance in your organization, this series is designed to meet you where theory and practice intersect. Today, in our CSP series, we are focusing on a foundational topic that every safety professional must master: OSHA injury and illness record keeping under 29 CFR 1904. This episode is built directly on Chapter 3 of David Yates' Safety Professionals Reference and Study Guide, a core reference for CSP candidates and practicing professionals alike. Chapter 3 does more than explain OSHA forms or definitions. It lays out the decision logic OSHA expects safety professionals to follow when an incident occurs. And that distinction matters because too often, record keeping is treated as an administrative exercise, something that starts with a logbook or a spreadsheet. But the source material makes it very clear. OSHA record keeping does not begin with paperwork. It begins with judgment. This chapter forces us to slow down and ask the right questions in the right order. Is the case work-related? Is it a new case? Does it meet the general recording criteria? Is it recordable, reportable, both, or neither? These are not academic questions. These are real-time decisions that affect compliance, metrics, enforcement exposure, and most importantly, employee trust. And before any of those questions are even relevant, Chapter 3 emphasizes something that is often assumed but rarely stated strongly enough. There is a priority that comes before OSHA logs, before deadlines, before calculations and rates. The book is explicit about this. The procedures are explicit about this. The intent is unmistakable. As safety professionals, and especially as CSP candidates, we are expected to understand not just what OSHA requires, but why the sequence matters. If you get the sequence wrong, even technically correct paperwork can still represent a failure of professional responsibility. So, in this episode, we are going to walk through that sequence exactly as the source material presents it. We are going to start at the moment an incident occurs, align our thinking with OSHA's intent, and then build forward into record keeping, reporting, and performance measurement. This approach not only strengthens exam readiness, it reflects how competent safety leadership actually operates in the field. With that foundation in place, let's move to the exact point where Chapter 3 tells us everything truly begins.
Without a doubt, it all starts there.
So, an incident happens. An employee reports an injury or an illness, the clock starts ticking, but the very first step, as the source material makes perfectly clear, actually has nothing to do with paperwork. It's non-negotiable.
Absolutely. The source material is crystal clear on this. When you look at page 44 and the procedures that follow, the immediate duty, the first priority, is to make sure the employee has received the proper, appropriate medical care.
Whatever that might be.
Whatever that might be, based on the nature and severity of the injury. That is the first and foremost concern, full stop.
So if they need an ambulance, you call an ambulance. You don't ask them to fill out a form first.
Of course not. If they need basic first aid, they get basic first aid. You know, we as safety and health professionals, we're sort of first responders in an administrative sense. But the immediate human need for care always comes first.
So, okay, let's say that immediate need is met. The employee is stable, they're getting the care they need. That's when the other clock starts, the administrative one. That's when you start trying to figure out if this event qualifies for the OSHA log. Correct.
Precisely. We only move to those tasks, documentation, determining work-relatedness, after the employee is stable and their condition has been evaluated. Only then can the safety professional, or whoever is designated, begin that often complicated process of making the reporting determination.
And that whole determination hinges on a very specific three-pronged definition of work-relatedness.
That's the entire game.
So how does OSHA define an injury or illness that is officially work-related and therefore has to be reported? Because, we all know it's not as simple as just, well, the person was clocked in when it happened.
Oh, it's far more complex. And the definition they provide, it's on page 45, is absolutely critical for accurate reporting. An injury or illness is considered work-related if it meets any one of three criteria.
Any one of the three.
Anyone. And they're all based on an event or an exposure that happened in the work environment.
All right, let's walk through them. Let's start with the most straightforward one, the one that deals with clear causation.
Okay. The first, and like you said, the least complicated, is if the injury or illness was caused by an event or exposure in the work environment.
So, direct cause and effect.
Exactly. The employee slips on a patch of oil on the factory floor and breaks their wrist. A falling tool from a scaffold strikes them on the shoulder. The work environment, the event, it directly initiated the harm. It's a straight line.
Clear causation. That's probably the 90% case, right? The easy one to categorize.
It is. But that's where the simplicity ends.
Okay, so what's the second criterion? This is where the nuance starts to creep in.
The second is if the work environment contributed to the resulting condition. This is where we move past that straight line of direct causation.
Contributed to, so it wasn't the sole cause, but it was a factor.
It was a factor, a measurable one. Maybe an employee, has underlying health issues and works in an extremely hot, stressful environment, and they suffer a cardiac event at work.
Right.
Now, if the safety professional, probably working with medical evidence, determines that those specific working conditions, the heat, the pace, the shift schedule, were a measurable factor in contributing to that event, then it counts.
So the work didn't start the condition, but it pushed it over the edge.
It helped bring it to fruition. That's a good way to put it.
Okay, and then there's a third one. This deals with pre-existing conditions, which I have to imagine is the trickiest part of this whole definition, especially with an aging workforce where people bring a lot of history to the job.
It is. This is the source of so many disagreements, and organizations have to tread very, very carefully here. The third criterion states that the condition is work-related if an event or exposure in the work environment significantly aggravated a pre-existing injury or illness.
Significantly aggravated.
That is the critical operative phrase.
That one word, significantly, that carries a ton of regulatory weight, doesn't it?
It does. It has to. It's designed to prevent employers from having to record every minor flare-up of an old ailment. For example, say an employee has chronic low back pain.
A very common scenario.
Very. If they simply sit in their desk chair for 8 hours and their back feels a little stiff at the end of the day, that is not a significant aggravation.
Okay, so what would be?
If that same employee is then assigned a new task that requires, say, sustained heavy lifting for a few hours, and that specific task directly causes a measurable, diagnosed worsening of their pre-existing disc issue that has been significantly aggravated by the work exposure.
So there has to be a specific event or exposure?
Yes, and it has to cause a measurable worsening beyond the normal progression of the condition. So the safety professional, they really do have to become a detective here, differentiating between the natural course of a previous condition and a genuine worsening that was caused by their current job duties.
Right. And the source is clear that if an employee comes to work with, say, arthritis, and their knee hurts just because they're walking around doing their normal, non-strenuous job, that's generally not recordable.
Exactly. The aggravation has to be traceable to something specific, something beyond the routine.
Okay, to really understand the boundaries here, we have to look at the other side, the exceptions. What is specifically not work-related, even if it happens while the employee is on the clock? These exemptions, I think they're around page 46 or 47, they provide that necessary context.
They are absolutely vital for drawing the correct administrative line. For instance, the common cold or flu.
Okay.
Unless you're a lab tech who contracts it directly from a lab sample or some other highly unusual work-related circumstance, it is not recordable, even if the employee feels sick at work or thinks they caught it from a coworker.
Makes sense. What about non-work activities on company property? I'm thinking of the classic example. An employee sprains their ankle playing flag football during their lunch break in the company parking lot.
That is explicitly exempt. Injuries that result solely from an employee's participation in a voluntary wellness program or a fitness activity like that flag football game are not considered work-related.
So voluntary is the key.
Voluntary is key. Same for eating or drinking. If you bring your own lunch and get food poisoning, it's not recordable. It happened on site, but it wasn't caused by the work environment or work duties.
Now, what about travel? This one seems like a huge gray area. If I'm traveling for work and I slip in my hotel shower,
Right.
is that reportable?
That's a great question, and the guidance is very clear on this. Travel injuries are generally recordable unless they result from activities that are considered personal care or voluntary.
And a shower is personal care.
Slipping in a hotel shower is considered personal care, just as if you had slipped in your shower at home.
Oh,
So not recordable.
yeah.
But if you are driving your car between two client sites as part of your job and you get into an accident, that driving is part of your work duty.
Ah, so you're engaged in an activity for the benefit of the employer?
Exactly. And any injury from that accident would be recordable. The distinction always hinges on that question. Was the employee engaged in a work activity or a personal one?
That level of specificity really underscores the complexity here, and that complexity leads us directly to what the source calls the most important concept in this whole section.
It is.
It's one that must be understood by anyone dealing with safety, HR, anything like this. The distinction between reportability and compensability.
This is a vital conceptual difference that organizations get wrong constantly. The source material really stresses this on page 45. It says, and I'm paraphrasing here, one important concept that must be understood is that reportability to OSHA should not be confused with compensability under workers' compensation laws.
So why do people get these two things confused? They both deal with someone getting hurt at work. Why do they have to be treated as totally separate things?
They get confused for that exact reason. They both deal with workplace harm. But they serve entirely different masters and have fundamentally different objectives.
Okay, break that down. Let's start with OSHA.
OSHA is a federal regulatory body. They are focused on prevention, compliance, and hazard control. Their goal is to track exposures and events that pose a risk to workers so they can enforce standards and drive systemic safety improvements.
So when something is recordable for OSHA, it means a hazard existed that they need to know about.
Precisely. They care about the hazard that led to the event.
Okay, now what about workers' compensation?
Workers' comp, or WC, is a mandatory state-level insurance program. It's focused on employee protection and financial indemnification.
So getting the employee paid?
Getting them paid for lost wages, covering their medical bills, regardless of who was at fault, as long as the injury arose out of and in the course of employment. Their objective is financial relief for the worker.
And that phrase, arose out of and in the course of employment, that sounds a lot broader than OSHA's specific three-pronged test for work-relatedness.
It is significantly broader. And this is where the confusion creates real problems. Let's walk through a couple of detailed scenarios to really nail this difference down because the practical consequences are profound.
Okay, give us a scenario that would be compensable under workers' comp, but not reportable to OSHA.
All right, let's imagine an employee, Sarah. She's on her mandatory unpaid lunch break. She's off-site, away from any work exposure. She's driving to a sandwich shop and gets into a minor fender bender.
Okay.
She sustains whiplash, and her doctor tells her to take 3 days off work to recover. Now, in many states, workers' comp laws cover employees during certain periods of travel near their work site, so this claim is likely compensable under WC. She'll get her lost wages covered.
Okay, so she gets paid. But does OSHA care about Sarah's whiplash?
No, not at all.
No.
Why? Because the injury did not result from an event or exposure in the work environment. She wasn't performing a work duty. It was a personal activity, getting lunch. So it is not an OSHA recordable case.
So WC pays the bill. OSHA does not log the hazard.
That's the perfect way to summarize it.
All right, now for the tricky one. This one is rarer, but it really highlights the different goals. Give us an example of a situation that is reportable to OSHA, but might not be compensable under workers' comp.
Okay. This scenario usually focuses on employee misconduct or a violation of a known safety rule. Imagine a long-haul truck driver, Mark. His company has a strict, well-known rule. He must wear a hard hat while loading cargo onto his flatbed.
And he knows the rule.
He knows it well. It's been part of his training for years. But today, he ignores it. A piece of equipment slips and falls. He sustains a serious concussion, and he's going to be away from work for weeks.
So is that reportable to OSHA?
Absolutely. 100% reportable to OSHA. A systemic hazard falling equipment existed in the work environment, and it causes severe injury. OSHA needs that data to assess the company's hazard control failures.
But what about his workers' comp claim? He broke a major safety rule.
And that's the key. WC is highly state-dependent, but in some jurisdictions, things like gross negligence, willful misconduct, or a clear failure to follow a known safety standard can lead to the WC claim being denied, or at least the benefits being significantly reduced.
So Mark might not get his financial compensation.
Correct. But the company must still record the incident. on their OSHA 300 log. The regulatory objective of tracking the hazard takes precedence over the financial outcome of the claim.
That's a powerful point. If you mix those two systems up, your safety statistics are immediately wrong. You're walking this administrative tightrope, serving two different legal masters at the same time.
Absolutely. And a high WC payout rate doesn't automatically mean a high DART rate, and vice versa. It's so critical to keep them separate.
Right. And speaking of statistics, even after we've correctly filtered our incidents and figured out which ones are work-related, we're not done. We haven't determined if they're recordable yet. There's one more critical threshold.
Yes, there is.
And that's the difference between simple first aid and professional medical treatment.
This is the final gatekeeper. This is the technical detail that defines what actually goes on the log. An injury or illness is only recordable if it requires medical treatment beyond first aid.
So if it only requires first aid, it does not go on the OSHA 300 log.
It does not. The process stops there.
Which means we need to know, with absolute precision, what OSHA defines as first aid. Because if the treatment an employee receives is on that specific list, we can stop the reporting process right there.
And thankfully, OSHA has defined a very specific, exhaustive list of what qualifies as first aid. This ensures consistency across all employers. If a treatment goes beyond this list, it crosses the line into medical treatment and the incident instantly becomes recordable.
Okay, give us some of the key items on that first aid list. What are the common treatments that are not recordable?
The most common ones involve simple interventions, using non-prescription medication, but, and this is key at non-prescription strength.
So a couple of Advil from the bottle in the first aid kit is okay.
That's first aid, also on the list. Cleaning, flushing, or soaking wounds on the surface of the skin, applying bandages, Band-Aids, things like that, using temporary, non-rigid support, like an elastic bandage or a sling.
What about hot or cold packs?
Hot or cold therapy, like ice packs or heating pads, that's first aid. And crucially, a single visit to a doctor or other licensed professional for observation only, where no actual treatment is given, is also classified as first aid.
So if I send an employee to urgent care just to get checked out after a bump on the head, and the doctor says, "You're fine, no concussion," and sends them back to work.
That's not recordable. It was for observation.
So let's use an example. An employee gets a minor burn. The on-site nurse applies a simple bandage and some over-the-counter cream. That's just first aid.
You're right.
But if that burn was more severe and the doctor prescribed a specific prescription strength burn cream,
The instant the prescription is written, the injury flips to being recordable. The line is drawn when you move to professional medical intervention. Things like stitches, sutures, staples,
right,
or prescription medications, as we said, using rigid immobilization devices like a cast or a hard splint, or things like physical therapy or chiropractic treatments. That shift from simple, immediate care to structured medical management is the trigger for OSHA recordability.
That clarity is essential. Okay, so once we've established the injury is work-related and it requires medical treatment beyond first aid, we now have a raw count of recordable incidents, which finally brings us to the quantification phase.
Finally, now we can do the math.
As we established at the top, a raw count of injuries is meaningless. If I tell you a giant manufacturing company had 50 injuries last year, that sounds terrifying. But if they employ 200,000 people across dozens of plants, 50 injuries might be world-class performance.
That's exactly why we need metrics. Rates standardize the data. They allow businesses, regulators, insurers, everyone to compare performance fairly. It doesn't matter if you're a small specialty fabricator with 30 employees or a massive global logistics firm.
The rates let you compare apples to apples.
Yes. They let the business understand, objectively, how their safety performance truly measures up against their peers or industry benchmarks. And that is often crucial for winning contracts or lowering your insurance costs.
Let's start with the broadest metric. The one that captures all of the incidents we just determined were recordable, the total case incident rate, or TCIR.
Right. TCIR is introduced on page 51, and it is the broadest measure of safety performance because its numerator, the top part of the fraction, includes every single recordable injury and illness.
So anything that required more than first aid?
Anything, regardless of how minor the resulting time loss or restriction was. A single stitch, a single prescription. It goes into the TCIR calculation.
So TCIR is a metric that's primarily focused on the frequency of incidents. It's about how often the system breaks down just enough to require some kind of professional medical intervention.
Correct. TCIR gives you that big picture of overall workplace harm. It flags the frequency of failure. And the source makes a very key linkage here between TCIR and the next metric we need to discuss, DART. It explicitly notes that all cases used in the DART calculation are a subset of the cases included in the TCIR.
So DART is a slice of the TCIR pie.
Exactly. DART is derived from the TCIR population.
Okay, so if TCIR measures frequency, the next metric, DART, is focused squarely on severity. It measures the true operational cost of an incident, the loss of human capacity. DART, standing for days away, restricted, or transfer rate. This is the number that truly grabs the attention of a CFO.
DART is laser-focused on productivity and sustained system failure. The definition is right there in the acronym. It tracks only those recordable cases that meet a high severity threshold.
And that threshold has 3 possible outcomes.
3 specific outcomes. The incident resulted in days away from work, restricted work duties, or a temporary or permanent job transfer.
This metric really is the indicator of a systemic failure, because if a control measure failed so badly that the worker couldn't perform their normal duties, if the organization had to scramble to cover a shift or modify a task list, that demands executive attention. It moves the conversation from compliance to business continuity.
It absolutely does. Let's take an example. A single incident that requires 5 stitches might raise your TCIR.
Because it's medical treatment beyond first aid.
Right. But if the employee is back at work the next day doing their normal duties, it doesn't affect your DART rate at all. But if that same incident resulted in, say, a broken wrist that requires the employee to be on light duty for 3 weeks, unable to do their normal job, that instantly impacts your DART rate.
Okay, now let's get into the calculation itself. The formula for the DART rate is on page 52, and it contains that magical constant that always confuses people until they understand its purpose. 200,000.
This is where we need to dive deep into the math, because understanding the intent behind the numbers is the real key to interpreting the result. The equation for the DART rate is the number of DART cases multiplied by 200,000.
All divided by.
All of that is then divided by the total number of hours worked.
Let's break down those components. Number of DART cases is straightforward. That's the raw count of the severe incidents we just talked about.
Correct. And the denominator, total number of hours worked, is crucial. It provides the context of the organization's total exposure to risk.
Right. A company with 10 million hours worked has far more opportunity for something to go wrong than a company with 100,000 hours.
Exactly. By dividing the incidents by the total hours, we create a rate based on the actual time employees spent exposed to hazards.
But the numerator has that critical multiplier, 200,000. Before I understood this, I just assumed it was some arbitrary government number. But it's not arbitrary at all. It's the standardization factor.
It is the single most important element for being able to compare one company to another. The number 200,000 is derived from one fundamental industry benchmark.
And that is?
It represents 100 full-time employees working for 1 full year.
I remember seeing this derivation and having that aha moment. It suddenly all clicked into place.
The math is simple. You take the benchmark of 100 employees. You assume they work a standard 40-hour work week. And you assume they work 50 weeks out of the year, which allows for 2 weeks of vacation or holidays.
So 100 times 40 times 50?
100 employees times 40 hours per week times 50 weeks per year equals exactly 200,000 total labor hours.
So by using 200,000 in the formula, we are essentially normalizing our company. Whether we have 50 employees or 5,000, we're asking the question. If our company were exactly 100 people, how many severe injuries would we have experienced?
That is precisely the normalization principle at work. This constant is what allows a small machine shop to report a DART rate that can be immediately benchmarked against federal averages from the Bureau of Labor Statistics or directly compared to a huge competitor.
It creates that apples-to-apples comparison across the entire industry.
It does. Without it, you're comparing apples to elephants. It would be meaningless.
Let's use the specific example from the source material to make this concrete for everyone listening. This scenario gives us a specific data set.
Right. It says you have one DART case and your company worked a total of 278,942 hours.
Okay, let's plug that into the formula.
We set up the equation. It's one DART case times 200,000 divided by 278,942 total hours worked.
So the numerator becomes 200,000.
Correct. And we divide 200,000 by 278,942. And the result the book provides is approximately 0.72.
DART equals 0.72. So what does that number actually mean? How does a safety manager explain that to their CEO?
A DART rate of 0.72 means that for every 100 full-time workers employed by this organization over the period, they experienced 0.72 severe incidents that led to days away, restricted work, or job transfer.
So less than one severe injury per 100 employees.
Correct. And now this number, 0.72, is a solid objective metric. Now, the safety professional has to use it. If the industry average for their specific sector, let's say heavy construction, is 2.0, then this company is performing excellently. Their controls are strong.
But if the industry average is 0.5,
And they are significantly lagging their peers, and they have urgent systemic issues to address. The rate itself is just a tool. The interpretation and benchmarking are what drive improvement.
and that leads right back to why DART is often seen as the more critical metric, at least from a financial perspective, compared to TCIR.
Absolutely. DART focuses exclusively on operational interruption. Days away means you have scheduling gaps and maybe have to pay overtime. Restricted duty means lost productivity and increased supervisory burden. A job transfer means retraining costs. These are all direct hits to the bottom line.
So if we're connecting this to the bigger picture, DART is the number that external parties are really looking at to judge an organization's risk profile.
Without a doubt. DART is often favored by regulatory agencies when they're deciding who to audit. It's used by insurance carriers when they set your premiums, since downtime and restricted work dramatically increase claim costs.
And for bidding on jobs.
Crucially, if you're a contractor bidding on a major project, the client will almost always demand your DART rates for the last 3 years. A high DART rate is seen as evidence of poor management and a higher risk of project delays.
So just to summarize this section, TCIR tracks the frequency of all recordable events. It's every time you cross that beyond first aid threshold. And DART, on the other hand, tracks the severity and the true financial and operational impact of those events on the company's ability to do its work.
That is the perfect summary of the functional difference. And you really do need both. A high TCIR with a low DART rate suggests you have a lot of minor injuries. Maybe you have housekeeping or procedural compliance issues that aren't causing severe harm.
But a low TCIR and a high DART.
That would be devastating. It would suggest that your controls are mostly working, but when they fail catastrophically. That requires immediate high-level management intervention.
So once these incidents are identified, they're recorded, they're quantified into these rates, the administrative duties are still not over? The source dedicates space on page 53 to the necessity of retention and updating.
Yes, because in the world of regulatory compliance, records are only valuable if they're meticulously maintained.
This is more than just good bookkeeping.
Oh, it's a core regulatory requirement. It ensures you can be audited and that you can do historical trend analysis. Accuracy in the moment means nothing if the records aren't maintained correctly over time. The requirements are explicit. You have to retain these records for 5 years following the end of the calendar year they relate to.
5 years? That's a long time in business. What specific documents are we talking about here that need that level of retention?
We're talking about 3 core documents that are central to all OSHA reporting.
Okay, let's start with the master document, the main log.
That would be the OSHA Form 300, the log of work-related injuries and illnesses. This is your primary ledger. It's the running list of every single recordable incident that meets all the criteria we've just discussed.
And what information is on it?
It documents the employee's name, their job title, the date of the injury, where the event occurred, a description of the injury, and then it classifies the outcome. Was it an injury or an illness? Did it involve days away? Was it a transfer? And so on.
And this has to be kept up to date throughout the year.
Yes, currently and accurately.
Okay, so the 300 log has the summary data, but the deeper investigative details are kept somewhere else.
They are. That's the OSHA Form 301, the Injury and Illness Incident Report. You have to complete one of these for every single entry you make on the 300 log.
So this is the story behind the line item.
Exactly. This is the detailed narrative. Who was injured? What was the employee doing right before it happened? How did the injury occur? What was the object or substance that harmed them? All the granular details. This is what you use for a root cause analysis.
And then there's the third form, the one that gets posted for all the employees to see.
That is the OSHA Form 300A, the Summary of Work-Related Injuries and Illnesses. This document is basically a snapshot. It's a numerical roll-up of the entire year's data from your 300 log.
So no names on this one.
No names, just the totals. Total number of cases, total number of deaths, total days away from work, total days on restriction or transfer. And critically, it's the form that contains the total hours worked for your establishment. This is where you get the numbers to calculate your official TCIR and DART rates.
And there are specific posting requirements for the 300A, right? It's not just an internal document.
Correct. The 300A summary must be certified as correct by a company executive, a VP, a CEO, the owner.
So someone high up has to attest to its accuracy.
Yes. And then it must be posted prominently in a common area where notices are usually posted. for 3 months, specifically from February 1st through April 30th of the following year.
And that's to ensure transparency so employees can see the company's safety performance.
Exactly. It's a right-to-know issue.
The idea of updating is also important here, right? Especially for injuries that happen late in the year.
Absolutely. The source materials emphasize updating because incident outcomes aren't always final on the day they happen.
Yeah.
Let's say an employee is injured in December, and you record it on the 300 log as restricted work.
Okay.
But then in January, their doctor takes them out of work completely. Their status changes to days away from work. You must go back to the previous year's log and update that entry to reflect the most severe outcome, even though it's now a new calendar year.
So the log has to be a living document for a while.
It has to be. That attention to detail ensures that the data used for your 300-day summary, and therefore your calculated TCIR and DART rates, accurately reflects the final total burden of that injury. If you don't retain and update these records, you can't prove your compliance and you can't use the data for effective risk management.
Okay, let's use the final summary section from the source material, page 53, to kind of synthesize the main takeaways from this deep dive.
The synthesis is simple, but I think absolutely vital. We covered 2 crucial categories. First, on the legal and administrative side, we have to remember that those criteria for work-relatedness caused by, contributed to, or significantly aggravated are totally distinct from workers' comp laws.
Do not conflate the two.
Do not. OSHA reporting is about gathering data on hazards to drive prevention. Workers' comp is about paying the claim. If you mix them up, your data is corrupted in the start.
And the second main takeaway is on the analytical side. Performance isn't judged by raw counts.
Never. Safety performance is ultimately judged by those quantifiable calculated rates, TCIR and DART. They normalize the data to that 100-employee benchmark using the 200,000 constant. This allows you to objectively measure the frequency of all recordable incidents.
That's TCR.
And more critically, the severity and resulting operational disruption caused by those incidents.
Which is DART.
These metrics are the standardized language of safety performance. They're how we measure how effective our risk controls truly are.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've gone into what might seem, at first glance, like really dry compliance rules, but they're actually the core measurement tools for effective strategic risk management.
They really are.
I feel like we successfully extracted those key knowledge nuggets, recognizing that crucial difference between OSHA reportability and workers' comp, detailing the precise threshold between first aid and a recordable case, and really mastering the language of the DART calculation, especially why that 200,000 constant is so important.
And as we close, let's leave you with one final thought to mull over. Let's connect DART directly back to strategic business value.
Okay.
We establish that the DART rate measures incidents that result in days away, restricted work, or job transfer. By definition, these are measurable interruptions to your planned work schedule. They force costly operational adjustments.
So it's basically a quantification of unexpected scheduling volatility.
Precisely. Now, if a company views maximizing production, maximizing efficiency, and minimizing unexpected costs as paramount, which, all competitive companies do, then the DART rate isn't just a safety metric that OSHA makes you calculate.
What is it then?
It is a direct measure of your operational efficiency loss. It is a quantifiable measurement of the cost of uncontrolled hazard exposure, expressed in terms of lost human capacity and production system failures.
So if you're an executive or a manager, how does looking at safety not as a cost center, but as your most potent measure of operational inefficiency, how does that change how you prioritize hazard control?
Well, think about it. If every point you drop your DART rate translates directly to fewer unexpected schedule changes, fewer costly staffing shortages, more productive labor hours, and ultimately lower insurance premiums, and a greater competitive advantage when you bid for work,
then safety isn't a compliance issue you have to deal with.
it ceases to be a grudging compliance issue. It becomes an essential business optimization strategy. Making that connection is what truly drives world-class safety performance.
That shifts the entire conversation from avoiding fines to driving core business value, something very powerful for all of you to think about as you review your own organization's metrics. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure. Until next time, stay safe and keep thinking critically about the numbers behind the policies.